I've always had an interest with cities and media. They've always felt fantastical whenever I'd see them growing up. As someone who grew up in a suffocatingly small and extremely rural area, well, this one to be more specific, I was always captivated whenever I'd see depictions of cities and media. London and Rome always felt like magical wonderlands, so different from my surroundings that they honestly felt less like real life and more like a fantasy. So because of this, I decided to rant about some things I love in cities, primarily from my favorite artistic medium, video games. I'll be leaving timestamps so you can skip to the next section if you wish to avoid spoilers for these games, or if you just don't care much about the cities being discussed. Unlike other forms of media, you can actually explore these locations. Movies can do a brilliant job of showing you cool set pieces, but in games, you can actually travel down the streets, talk with the citizens, and discover some more overlooked sites. Just take Minas Tirith, for example. It's massive, but mostly when watching The Lord of the Rings, we just get to see the Citadel. We can't really go and explore how the citizenry live in each tier. We can't take a look at the notable sites located at each area, unless the plot decides to bring us there. But the great thing about games is the story is wherever you decide to take it. Before I really start talking about the cities and games that I love, there's two honorable mentions I'd like to discuss. Both of these are in games, well, to a limited degree, but you can't really explore them as much as I'd like. Still, I hope someday we'll get massive explorable versions of these cities, so I do want to discuss them here. Coruscant, capital city of the galaxy far, far away from Star Wars. When I first saw this city in one of my favorite movie trilogies of all time, I instantly fell in love. The idea of an ecumenopolis, or world city as I'll be calling it for the rest of this video, considering I'm not Greek and will be less likely to butcher the pronunciation this way, always was a great design to me, and Coruscant was probably my first exposure to that idea. We definitely get to spend a lot of time in Coruscant throughout the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars, but that barely scratches the surface. This city definitely has a theme you'll see a few more times in this video. Classist tiered cities, from the rich elite who dominate the tallest skyscraper to the poor in the lower levels who will probably never see the sun. This city can be both heaven and hell. Through the prequel trilogy, we mostly see the higher levels of Coruscant. The Opera House, Padme's skyscraper top apartment, and the iconic architecture of the Towered Jedi Temple and domed Senate building. The films do a great job of showing how gorgeous Coruscant can be, but there certainly is another side to the city. The Coruscant underworld, an area filled with charlatans, swindlers, traffickers, all manner of assorted thugs. We've not really seen much exploring it, apart from a few episodes of the Clone Wars and a single speeder chase in Attack of the Clones. We had the opportunity to explore this nightmarish land, but sadly Star Wars 1313 was cancelled. I really hope with one of the new projects being worked on by a studio, well, besides EA of course, we'll be able to see a fully explorable version of the city brought to life in video game form. Magic the Gathering has many great cities in its multiverse, from the holy city of Thraben on the horrifying world of Innistrad to the Athenian-inspired Miletus on the plain of Theros. However, one city shines above all the rest, Ravnica, the city of guilds. Another world city, but this time inspired by the Renaissance architecture of cities such as Prague. However, there's something very strange about this city. The more you examine the lovely art on the cards, you'll definitely start to notice how parts of the city look completely different from others. Some areas, like this, have very rugged stone buildings and seem oppressive, whereas others, such as this, show a towering mechanical monstrosity with lightning pulsating out in all directions. That's one of the strong parts of Ravnica's design. For those unaware of MTG lore, Ravnica doesn't have only a single governing force. Well, it does, but for the purpose of this video, let's ignore him. Ravnica is a world where 10 separate guilds constantly on the brink of war with each other rule. Each of these guilds do different things to make the city run more efficiently. From the lawmakers of the Azoria Senate, to the genetic engineers of the Simic Combine, and even the Catholic Church criminal empire, known in Magic as the Orzhov Syndicate. These guilds exist purely for the betterment of their members. They have loose treaties with each other, but it's a delicate balance between war and peace. The guilds provide a lot of advantages. Obviously employment is a notable one, but they also give you access to many resources and added security. The Izzet League, for example, give their mad scientist-esque inventors access to countless labs where they can perform any experiment, despite the ethical implications. The lore really gives ideas of where each guild owns their territory. The Golgari Swarm and House Dimir both live in the sewers, but for very different reasons. The Golgari are basically in charge of sewer maintenance, but they also use the fungus and animal carcasses what may turn up to perform necromantic experiments. For the Dimir, however, discretion is everything. They're the information brokers of the city. Most people think the Dimir are just a myth, despite them appearing countless times at significant moments of Ravnican history. They infiltrate the other guilds to find out what they're planning, and use that information to get an advantage. There's also the Gruul clans, personally one of my least favorite guilds from both a lore and gameplay perspective. They're basically the homicidal park rangers of Ravnica, protecting what little bit of nature is left on the plane and destroying any form of the city what tries to expand in their territory. I absolutely love the idea of these guilds performing different duties to make a functional city. It's far better world design than you'd expect from a card game. The free city of Novigrad was one what certainly captivated me during my playthrough of The Witcher 3. The Witcher 3 was the only game in the series I've played, so I don't know much about the events of the previous games, novels, or even the show. It was an interesting location with the radical religious fervor that led to the persecution of mages. I think that political situation is one of the best parts of Novigrad. The quests and characters certainly add a lot of personality to the city. The control that the big four gang bosses have over the city was definitely a great concept. What appeared to me like a capital city for the church, very similar to Rome in our world, was so corrupt that the criminal underworld seemingly rule everything within its walls. That being said, I do feel like the city does have a major issue. Novigrad feels like a city what naturally grew instead of being planned. Although that gives it a really unique feel, it also makes it difficult to navigate. Its massive size makes it feel like a maze of buildings. I found myself at many points trying to navigate to a specific spot, taking a wrong turn, and suddenly being on a completely different level. I mostly spent my time there at the marketplace area right in the center of town, but anytime I really wanted to explore, I'd get stuck between a wall of buildings and would need to find a long way around. I can't even begin to count how often I'd be headed towards a location for a quest, only to realize I'm on a completely wrong level of elevation. This happened especially often when I needed to do quests at Sibby Rubin's bathhouse. I feel like it's just big for the sake of being big, and I really think that's the greatest flaw of a location with such amazing lore. In many ways, Goldenrod City is the exact opposite end of the spectrum. In stark contrast to some of the more traditionally Japanese towns in Johto, Goldenrod is a massive urban hub, or more accurately, it feels that way. At the time, it was the largest city in Pokemon, but somewhat ironically, it's really just a single road with some offshoot alleyways. Still, there were many things in the city what felt large, and the story did have you returning here quite often. The radio tower and underground passage were major settings in the plot. The department store was one of the best places to shop in the game due to its wide variety of items. The train station, although unlocking very late, adds a great way to fast travel through the different regions of the game. And the addition of the game corner really made it feel like this city had everything included in Saladin City from the previous generation, but it also gave you more activities and even earlier access. As a kid, I would always just walk around the city and create my own headcanon. I used to call it playing The Sims in Pokemon. I used to do it in quite a few other games as well, but the general idea is just I pretend to be a random resident in the city. Most of the time, I'd be a transfer student staying with Bill's family while I study. Other times, I was a delivery driver, traveling through the world on my bike, doing odd jobs for the various gym leaders or NPCs. With it being such a major hub in the game, I really wish it was as large as I thought it was when I was a kid, although that's mainly the fault of the hardware restrictions at the time. Assassin's Creed always did a great job depicting cities. Just to name a few of my favorites, there's Victorian London, Athens during the Peloponnesian War, and Nassau during the Golden Age of piracy. However, my personal favorite was Halifax, from Assassin's Creed Rogue. I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. A criminally underrated game with an amazing sea shanty soundtrack. Although, I definitely have my own biases, as I've been to modern-day Halifax more times than I can count, and I certainly love the city. Although if I put aside my personal sentiment, I have to admit it's really not too terribly impressive. So my actual favorite is probably Rome from Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Rome's great because it's just a massive playground with so many different areas. I loved the contrast between the more rural northern areas of the map, such as where you meet La Volpe, compared to the cluttered central part of the city. Being able to see and climb many historical landmarks such as the Colosseum was easily a highlight. Being able to upgrade shops and locations throughout the city was also a great part. But although I feel like it was the superior city overall, I was really upset about how it felt compared to its predecessor. I mean, Assassin's Creed 2 gave you access to Florence, Venice, Monteriggioni, and a few other areas as well. I remember on my first playthrough, as I was exploring Rome, and as the game would progress, I'd unlock more areas, I kept wondering when I'd get another city as well, and I never did. Also, although you can make a noticeable impact by upgrading Rome, it didn't have the same feeling as in Assassin's Creed 2 with Monteriggioni. Rome was an excellent playground, and I certainly spent a lot of time in it, but it really wasn't much more than that. The Fallout franchise has many great cities, each with their own interesting twist. New Vegas tried to be a shimmering slice of modernity in post-apocalyptia, a great contrast compared to all around it, but sadly, due to time constraints for the game, it never really hit the mark. It tried to replicate the den of debauchery that was New Reno in Fallout 2. I don't have much to say on this city because I took this suggestion from a friend. I've only ever played a small amount of Fallout 2 myself. I like Rivet City being a former naval vessel, and although it's a nightmare to navigate, it's a really cool idea. I love the Republic of Dave, and although it's definitely too small to be considered a city, the idea of a micronation where you can meddle with its election is really clever. I love how Novak, the Pit, and other parts of the world get their name from partially destroyed signs. And speaking of Novak, it also has a dinosaur, so that's pretty cool. And although Fallout 4 put more of an emphasis on creating your own settlements, which I definitely wasn't a fan of, I will concede that Diamond City being an old baseball field was a decent idea. However, for me, no other city in Fallout will even come close to Megaton. At first glance, it may look like nothing more than just a pile of junk. Well, that's because it is just a pile of junk. But the thing is, at the center of Megaton is an undetonated nuclear bomb what fell during the Great War. Most other games would have things like this just be a prop. However, with Megaton, you can actually choose to detonate it and wipe the entire city off the map. It's even part of a side quest. It was definitely one of the most memorable moments for me in Fallout 3. And although I hardly ever destroyed the city, I really appreciate the option being there to change the world so drastically. The next two cities are very similar in many ways. Midgar from Final Fantasy VII and Taris from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, both excellent settings for tutorial levels. Personally, I prefer the Sith-occupied world city of Taris myself, possibly due to nostalgia as I experienced it first. The city of Midgar, which I've seen described as both a cyberpunk and dieselpunk setting, despite it feeling like neither, is really interesting in its own right. Both are excellent representations of the classist tiered cities idea I mentioned earlier. With Taris, it's divided into the upper, lower, and under city. The upper city has shining skyscrapers, but also mass patrols of troopers from the ancient Sith Empire. Well, ancient relative to the films at least. Knights of the Old Republic actually takes place about 4,000 years before A New Hope. As you progress downwards to the tunnels of the lower city, the patrols are far more rare. The real power is the various gangs of swoop racers fighting in the streets. Deeper still is the Undercity, a small shanty town for the most impoverished citizens. They have desperately built barriers to protect themselves from the horrors of the planet's surface, but many of the horrors can't be defeated as the residents are facing the Rakghoul Plague, a disease what transforms them into the savage beast their barricades protect against. In contrast, Midgar is a corporate-owned metropolis divided into 8 sectors. Each sector offers different things, but a notable feature of this city is that the rich live on plates suspended far above the surface, whereas the poor live below, only given light by massive artificial sun lamps. Each sector is powered by a Mako reactor. It's basically like green oil, and they provide energy to the rest of the city. You only get to see a few areas of the city in either version of the game. You mainly spend your time in the slums underneath the plates of Sectors 6, 7, and 5. Even though they're slums, they all have quite a few differences. Sector 7's most notable landmark is a pub called Seventh Heaven, your main party's base of operations. Sector 5 has this dilapidated church and one of the only locations lush in greenery, the home of your party member Aerith. Sector 6 is a hive of scum and villainy, with the town of Wall Market owned by the mobster Don Corneo. At the center of the city is the Shinra building, the headquarters of the Shinra Power Company, who run the city both electrically and administratively. Early on, they're made out to be the main antagonistic force of the game. I absolutely love seeing the area surrounding Midgar after you leave it in the original game. The remake does a pretty good job at showing how much of a wasteland it is, but in the original, you really get a sense of the life force being drained from the planet with just how barren and desolate the outskirts of Midgar is compared to the rest of the world. But the main reason why I wanted to discuss these two cities together is because at the end of each game's tutorial, large parts of them get destroyed. This isn't something like Megaton where it's an optional decision for extra world building. This is completely unavoidable. There's nothing you can do about it. Taris was far more devastating. The Sith Navy performed an orbital bombardment of the planet. According to Carthonasi, one of your party members, there wasn't a single building over 2 stories tall. Seeing this as a child was, well, horrifying to say the least. Everything I've done on the city, all the good and bad I did to the populace was for nothing. All the friends I've made, all the people I saved, anyone who wasn't with me on my ship, the Ebon Hawk, were almost certainly eradicated. In comparison, the destruction of Sector 7 in Midgar is a lot less devastating, but the fact that it's orchestrated by the powers that be is disturbing. Shinra, the main governing force of Midgar, in an effort to defeat the Sector 7 cell of the terrorist group Avalanche, chooses to go nuclear and collapse the giant plate on top of the sector, killing countless instantly. It isn't very often you get to witness such tragedy and destruction to a part of the world, especially to a tutorial level, the only part of the world you get to experience up until now, and it works marvelously in both scenarios. With this next segment, I imagine both Persona and Shin Megami Tensei fans will be asking me why I didn't pick Tokyo. For the SMT fans, the multiple post-apocalyptic depictions of Tokyo in the Megaton franchise are absolutely lovely. My personal favorite rendition of this is in SMT4, Beneath the Firmament, where humanity is struggling for survival in a demon-filled subterranean Tokyo, while the people of a more medieval kingdom of Mikado live in luxury above them. I also adore Nocturne's Vortex World, a depiction what I tend to describe as an inverted globe, as Tokyo folds in on itself. But both of these feel like a city in name only. The real cities in these worlds are the small districts where life is desperately clinging to survival, and the brief areas you can talk to people in Mikado. The gathering places of survivors or factions, such as Shibuya, Ginza, or Ikebukuro. In comparison, Persona fans may be outraged I didn't choose to talk about Tokyo from Persona 5. Tokyo has everything what Tatsumi Port Island has, and more. If I'm being objective, it's probably the better city overall, and all the points I make can also be applied to Tokyo, just with different context. I just simply prefer Tatsumi Port Island. You listen to the music and it just feels welcoming. You're a resident of this area, and that's something what hasn't been seen in the other cities I discussed. You go to school, hang out with friends, discover your own favorite nooks to relax in. There's just so much to do here. Tatsumi Port Island is divided up into many areas, but offer a variety of activities to do each in-game day. From Polonia Mall, with its weapon store and stat-increasing activities, to meeting your classmates at Gakuhan High School. You can join a club after school, or enjoy the student council activities. Or maybe you prefer going to the strip mall at Iwatodai Station to meet up with a sweet old couple who work at the bookshop. I know I certainly did. Then, after a long day, you can relax at your dorm and just enjoy jamming out to Tunes. The music really adds to the world. You can clearly see some headphones and an MP3 player on the protagonist, so it adds to the immersion that he's just some awkward kid wandering through town listening to his extremely unique taste in music. In Persona 3, the plot revolves around a hidden hour, only experienced by a special few right when the clock strikes midnight. When this happens, the world transforms around you, and it's really interesting to see locations around the city in this dark hour. The dark hour exists due to the sins of a company known as the Kirijo Group, more specifically the actions of its former head, the grandfather of your party member Mitsuru. She feels a direct responsibility to end the phenomenon, as it turns the world into a far more dangerous place for any mortal being unfortunate enough to be pulled in. Technology ceases to work, people transform into coffins, and the world is tinted green as beast-cult shadows rampage about the streets. As the full moon approaches, and the shadows escalate their assault, it causes the unaware population to develop a disease known as apathy syndrome, an illness where the victims can't be bothered to function at all. They can't eat, drink, or even move. They're too apathetic to do anything. The most notable transformation is to your school, as it morphs into an enormous tower called Tartarus. You and your party must ascend to the top throughout the course of the game. The contrast between the cheerful daytime and the nightmarish landscape of the dark hour makes you really value your daily life through the game, and that's something I really admire about this area. It sort of ties into the main theme of the game, Memento Mori. You only get to spend a single in-game school year in Tatsumi Port Island. Although it's possible to adhere to a strict schedule and witness everything, that's not how this game's supposed to be played. You're supposed to miss out on the last few events, and when the game's over, you can reflect on the eternal what-ifs. That's how life is after all. With Persona 3 having so many options on what you can do each in-game day, it makes every event seem wonderful. It makes all the moments you spent with the beloved characters moments you'll treasure, and when your limited time in this world comes to an end, you can reflect back and think about how every day you spent in it was special. Anyone who's ever played Skyrim were probably immediately captivated by the cities, and for good reason. Most of them are very creatively designed, but in my opinion, none of them can even come close to the magnificence of the Imperial City from Oblivion. This city feels massive, and there's so much to do. Situated on a large island in the middle of Lake Rumer, its iconic design is what made me fall in love with the Elder Scrolls. Each area of the city is divided into districts. They all branch out right from the center, sort of like the spokes of a wheel. They're all a bit self-explanatory whenever you hear their name. The Elven Gardens has a very large, or maybe I should say high, elf population, whereas the Market District has all the best stores in the game. This is the one place you'll be stopping at most often. Your first glimpse of this city is from this tower, inside your prison cell. You soon manage to escape through a secret tunnel leading to the sewer networks. The sewer system itself connects many of the districts together. You can even use the sewers to break into the basements of homes and shops. There are also many great guilds you can join in the city. The Arcane University is home to the Mages Guild, and although the questline is pretty mediocre, the university itself is quite a spectacle. Also, if you head down to the Waterfront District, you'll see much of the city's poor living in this area, and in the Gardens of Daraloth, you can interrupt a meeting of the Secretive Thieves Guild. You can also go to the Arena District and either watch a fight or participate in one. And right in the center of the city is the spectacular White Gold Tower, also known as the Imperial Palace. Many of the cities in Oblivion always seemed very similar to each other. I used to only really differentiate them with their most notable features or landmarks, like Skinred had the big castle, Bruma was the snowy one, Shadenhall is purple, Kvatch doesn't exist anymore, Anvil is on the coast, but as I'm sure you've noticed already, the Imperial City is very visually unique from the rest of the cities in this game. It used to be an Aelid city, basically an ancient city of elves who enslaved humanity. After mankind revolted and gained their freedom, they converted the city into their capital. But the architecture of the Imperial Palace isn't the only awe-inspiring spectacle. The Imperial Palace's interior is also a marvel. I always loved the feel of the enormous council chambers. Then, if we head downstairs, we enter the Imperial Palace basement. You need to find an hourglass here for the finale of the Thieves Guild, and there's a lot of really odd items, including this massive chair. Why is it here? Was there a giant on the council? And if so, did he wield this giant club next to it? Is it a magically growing item and it's here for safe storage? Is that why the basement is off limits? It always struck me as great that the game never tells you directly, or at least not during this quest. That's something else I really love about this city, how much it interacts with the side quests. Let's say you need to grab a bed, either to rest or level up, and you just so happen to stumble in the Bloated Float, a ship that doubles as an inn. You pay for your room, take a nap, and next thing you know, you and all of the other staff and patrons are victims of a kidnapping. Some criminals decided to hijack this boat and take the owner hostage, all because he spread rumors around about him discovering some great treasure. After you rescue the innkeep from the pirates, he reveals that it was just a massive PR stunt, and, well, apparently it worked. You can also encounter this guy here, Shady Sam, a merchant who waits outside the city walls to sell drugs to travelers. He was supposed to be a major character in a questline about the drug trade through Cyrodiil. However, this questline was eventually cut. I really like how he's still in the game though. The city itself actually feels like a real place, and all this makes it feel alive. It's just so
It's you. Hi.
I shopped at Three Brothers a couple of days ago. Not sure which one I talked to, though.
All three of them are nice folks.
The Great Prince is nothing but a fake. Haven't you heard? His father was a vampire. He's no orc, he's a monster. Someone should put him down.
I had no idea.
Without question.
Goodbye.
Farewell.
I've changed my mind. The NPC dialogue really breaks the immersion of it being a living city. If only there was a city what accomplished all the best parts of these examples. The political strife of Novigrad, the large feeling and simple navigation of Goldenrod, along with its centralized location so you'll return many times. The amazing playground of Rome, being able to witness the city's destruction, the abundance of activities like in Tatsumi Port Island, so each day feels different, the many districts so you can easily find what you need, and the side quests actually taking place inside the city itself, like in Oblivion. But most importantly, the feeling of actually being in a living world. Clocktown from Majora's Mask is the perfect mixture of everything good about these cities. The game takes place with a scenario sort of reminiscent to the movie Groundhog Day, where you relive the same 3-day cycle. If you're wondering what's causing this, well, just look up. The moon is on a collision course with the rest of the world, and you have 3 days to stop it, and the only way to do so is by constantly reversing time to restart the cycle. I remember when I first played this game and tried to find all the things to do in Clocktown during my first cycle, exploring every building, witnessing meticulously planned world events, and speaking to everyone, all with a time limit of less than a single real-life hour, made the city feel enormous. You can wander into the mayor's office and encounter an argument between the carnival organizer Muto and the captain of the guard, Vyson. They're debating whether or not to evacuate the city to avoid the collapsing moon. If they evacuate, they could hopefully save many lives, but it would cause a major loss of revenue for Muto, who is actively denying the moon will even collapse. How topical. As the final day arrives, you can see many people getting progressively more unhinged. Whether it's the mayor's wife drinking her troubles away at the milk bar, the postman desperately wanting to evacuate but he's duty-bound by his work schedule, or the swordsmaster crying in his back room, things just keep getting darker. And then, if you run out of time, the moon collapses and everything in this world gets destroyed. For its relatively small size, Clocktown has many hidden areas which you can explore. Back behind this area in East Clocktown, you can find a treasure chest with a bit of platforming, and by speaking to Anju here at the end after she delivers lunch to her grandmother, you can get a room just by claiming you have a reservation. Doing this results in you stealing the room from a Goron with the same name as you. It shows this Goron forced to sleep out in the cold, and by the next morning he's left town, presumably because he didn't want to sleep in the streets during a rainstorm. Because you stole his reservation for a bit of convenience, his vacation to the festival was ruined. The 3-day system really gives a chance for all the characters to interact. One of the biggest side quests is the Enshuin Cafe questline, and it can really display what I'm talking about. Cafe is the son of the mayor. He ran away from home after being cursed by the main villain, and his mother is recruiting people to search for him. You can see him on the dawn of the first day, putting a letter in a mailbox near the laundry pool. The postman then delivers this letter to Anju at the Stockpot Inn, a business what's hosting many of the performers for the carnival, such as these dancers rehearsing in West Clocktown each night. Anju isn't certain what happened to her love Cafe. Anju's mother seems convinced that Cafe ran away with Anju's best friend, Cremia, an NPC who doesn't even live in the city but shares a distinct connection with Anju. In actuality, Cafe is hiding in the back room of the Curiosity Shop, a late-night sort of pawn shop where criminals fence off their stolen goods. He was childhood friends with the owner, and Cafe is trying to get back his stolen engagement mask from a thief. With this one quest, we have a link between many of the NPCs in the city, and reasons for their schedules to intersect. But the characters aren't the only thing in the city what interact with each other. The side quests also intersect. This is where the 3-day system truly excels, as every character in Clocktown has their entire day scheduled to the hour. Anju is once again a golden example for how well this can work. Throughout the first day, she interacts with various characters in what seems like each hour. She needs to feed her grandmother lunch, have the mail delivered, and interact with potential customers. Then, depending on how far you got in the side quest with Cafe, she'll either decide to flee to Romani's ranch or wait out the apocalypse to see her love. The consequences of your actions are really prominent. I already mentioned the Goron who rented a hotel room, but that's not the only example. On the night of the first day, around midnight, you encounter this lady who works at the bomb shop, walking home with some new stock, when she gets assaulted by Sakon the thief. You can chase him down and get back the package she was carrying, but if you do this, he won't have any reason to go to the Curiosity Shop later to sell his stolen goods, and it causes a failure of the Anju and Cafe questline. The game wants to make things clear that no matter what you do, you can't save everybody. Despite how grim that may sound, it's an excellent example of how living and real the world can feel. I find it very notable that I can name many of the small side characters, but I struggle to think of more than a couple characters in some of the other cities, at least without having to look it up. The game's prequel, Ocarina of Time, has many shared assets due to the extremely short development time, but most of these characters didn't even have a name back then. Majora's Mask actually turned them into beloved and memorable characters. No role was too small, especially not the innkeeper. I hope this didn't sound like me ranting too much about Anju and Cafe. They're the perfect example of how a live Clocktown can be, and it's easily the meat and potatoes of why I love it so much. But before we wrap up, I did want to quickly mention a few other things I love about the city. The architecture is completely unique from anything you'll experience in Zelda, and it really feels like you're stepping into a whole different world, which, I mean, depending on how you interpret Majora's Mask's plot, you are. There's many stores in West Clocktown which specialize in certain products, and a lot of mini-games you can go to and try and win prizes. Some change with certain conditions, giving you a possibly more difficult challenge. And of course, how could I go without mentioning the fantastic music, which gets progressively more frantic as the 3-day cycle progresses. Clocktown is an absolute masterpiece, easily my favorite city in any video game. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please feel free to leave some criticism in the comment section. I'm always looking for opportunities to improve. If you liked this video and wanted to see more from me, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. Also, feel free to show your friends with similar interests. I originally got this idea when I was in college and needed to have a blog about art and video games. I used the blog to just rant about some of my favorite cities and games, mostly the art style. I imagine it still exists somewhere online, but I don't remember how to access it. I eventually decided to rant about the subject and hopefully give you all a bit of entertainment as well. I had to cut a few cities I wanted to discuss, mainly Rapture from Bioshock because I didn't have much to say about it apart from the similarities to Atlantis and the political situation. I also wanted to discuss Los Santos from GTA 5, but really all I'd have to say is that it's a great sandbox, something I already said in greater detail with Rome. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to city building games, especially City Skylines. The game itself is wonderful, but since the world is purely the player's creation, I obviously can't discuss anything about it. So with that, I'll bid you farewell. I hope you all enjoyed my ramblings, and I hope to see you in my next video.